Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Tomorrow's Ummah podcast, where we discuss and bring in youth to discuss things related to living in the West as Muslims. And today we have a very interesting topic for you all today. But firstly, I'd like to introduce our guest for today. I'm here with Dr. Abdullah Al-Qadri and my dear brother Zaed Islam. Assalamu alaikum, brothers.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So I think we spent a bit of time preparing for this episode. It's been a very exciting topic to look into, research into, and also now discuss. I think we're going to have a lot of back and forth today on this topic. I think Dr. Abdullah is willing to challenge us in some of these topics and go over them as well. Today we'll be talking about Hujjat al-Islam, the proof of Islam, Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, his life, his story, his works, its application today, and people's opinions today about him as well, which I think we will have many examples, many interesting examples to go from. But let's start nice and simple. The upbringing, the young life of Imam Ghazali, and how it was, any stories from it, and what we can learn from it. So who'd like to go first?
I think, it's tough to refute the title Hujjatul Islam. You don't get that just as a bystander to the deen and to the ilm of Islam.
Not at all.
Hujjatul Islam is quite literally proof of Islam. And I think a little bit later we can actually delve into why he was referred to as Hujjatul Islam. And I think one of the things that really strikes me about Imam Ghazali, which I really don't think that I see in the last 900 years of scholarship within Islam, that any Islamic scholar has done, is to be at the pinnacle. He was at the pinnacle of Islam in terms of theology, in terms of fiqh, in terms of usul al-din, in terms of falsafa, mantiq, anything you refer to. He was at the pinnacle.
Yeah.
And he himself went into a crisis, and we'll go into a little bit into why he went into the crisis and what the crisis was, where he literally just stopped talking in front of his students. And then he went to be a so-and-so janitor in a masjid. In today's day and age, it would be like the chancellor of Harvard University going to a common
Community
college and just becoming a janitor. It's unheard of.
Very much.
And I think that's part of the reason, and we'll hit on this, why he really journeyed Sufism, why he really understood tasawwuf, and what parts of his ilm drew him towards tasawwuf.
So let's set the scene.
Sure.
So Imam Ghazali rahimahullah was born in a part of Khorasan. It was now referred to as Iran.
Northern Iran.
Northern Iran, part of the Seljuk Empire at the time, as you know, a very prominent empire. This is the golden era of Islam. The later years of the golden era.
Correct, yes.
But a golden era nonetheless, where Islamic education, our advancement as civilization, as Muslims, there's unity, we're growing. Obviously, there's geopolitical issues. The Mongols are still around, and obviously we're going to talk about the decline as well, this golden era. And now Imam Ghazali is a very bright young student, and he, as he's studying, we know he makes his way to eventually Nizamiya, which is like elite special education.
I think it's important, before we get to the Nizamiya, his early childhood.
Early.
And
there's great stories.
Yeah, not even, I'm talking about his sohbah.
Oh, yeah.
Like early childhood. And there is a thought amongst the ulama, what made Imam Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali? What made his brother Imam Ahmed Al-Ghazali Imam Ahmed? Because remember, Imam Ahmed was no less of a scholar.
No.
And his elder brother.
A great figure. And his father.
That's what I wanted to touch upon.
Okay,
so his father. Let's start from his father. So his father was so where does he get his name Al-Ghazali? Some people say that his name is actually Al-Ghazali, which is from wool, because he was basically a weaver, correct. Or he was
it translates
seamster.
to weaver.
Yeah. So he was a wool weaver. And he had a profound love for people of ilm, for ulama. His father did. And he himself grew up in a situation where he couldn't seek ilm, but he had such a profound love for ilm. He used to do khidmah of ulama. He used to always just go and stand and sit in the presence of ulama. And the scholars, they say, because of that love and connection that he had with the scholars of ilm and Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted him two sons that would soon become like moons, like lights on the realm of Islam.
Stars, yeah.
Yeah. So basically what I was trying to get at is that sohbah that was implemented within, and remember his father, Imam Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali's father, actually passed away when he was very young.
Very young.
So he didn't really have a direct connection with him, but it was just the framework that he put within him in the first 6-7 years. Remember, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that the first 7 years is the most important. And today's psychology says, there's very famous psychology. You can literally Google this, YouTube it. Show me the first 7 years of a child, and I'll show you the rest of his future. Like that's Western non-Muslim Islamic scholars and philosophers and psychologists are saying that today. So I'm sure whatever ilm, whatever sohbah his father gave him about ilm truly taught him. And do you guys know about that quote when he really started out, when he went into the madrasa? What happened?
I'd love to hear it.
So when he started out in madrasa, it was because he was basically given to a very pious man.
A friend of the father.
Friend of the father's. And he had a little bit of money for Imam Ghazali and his brother.
Yeah.
And the money ran out.
So that they can... they can...
The money ran out very quickly. It wasn't a lot. He was a seamster. How much money is he going to earn? So the pious man decided, well, his father loved the ulama. What better way to give him ilm than to put him in a madrasa? And what used to happen back in the day, this is the golden age of Islam, you didn't actually pay a tuition. You went to seek ilm, they fed you. So Imam Ghazali, he said, I went to seek ilm without the purpose of seeking Allah, but ilm only found me when I sought Allah.
Allah.
SubhanAllah. That's one of the most profound quotes. At a young age.
SubhanAllah.
At a young age.
He says this at a young age?
He says this as a young age. Like because he wanted to get ilm, but he says my intention was for food. That's why I went into the madrasa, but I was so young. But it was only when I started seeking Allah that true ilm began to find me. And he realized this really early. Remember, around the age of 20, he's already published his first book.
Yeah.
Remember, at that time, his ustad, after the publication of his first book, Imam Al-Haramain, he literally said, today I've been buried alive. As a notion.
And Imam Al-Haramain also said, is the breadth of his knowledge is a sea one can drown in.
Yeah.
Imagine your teacher saying that your knowledge is a sea. And it's a sea that you can... It's just subhanAllah. It's amazing. And there's a story as well of Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah, when he is traveling and he gets stopped by caravan thieves, right? And
this is when he finishes his studies.
His studies.
He's coming back, yep.
And I may have jumped the gun a little here.
That's all right. Yeah.
But it's just such a nice story to hear that when, his items are taken, and then Imam Ghazali panics and he says, at least leave the books behind.
Leave my sack behind is what he said, where the notes were. Yeah.
Where his notes are.
Yeah.
And the thief looks at him and says, young scholar, what good can all this knowledge be if it was so easily taken from you?
Yeah.
And Imam Ghazali rahimahullah states that quote was so crucial to him in his early years that he began to memorize every single letter and word that he wrote after that.
That's easier said than done.
And okay, we're saying that, if we write books, that's one thing. But he wrote books, and it wasn't just like, a small amount of books. They're books that are studied to this day. Yeah. And so it tells you so much about the breadth of that knowledge. Brother Zaed,
one thing about like you mentioned, what was it that you just said about
the thief and taking
thief? So memorizing the books, so people like now I think it's very much neglected even among students of knowledge. Like people like of course there's everybody wants to memorize the Quran. Maybe if you're a bit more serious, you'll memorize the 10 qira'at of the Quran. But then when it comes to like memorizing the texts that you study, like there's kind of a negligence to that. And
we learn
it is very hard. But this used to be exactly. It's more now. It's kind of like I comprehend it, but I don't really memorize this text.
You get the idea.
Exactly. Yeah. But before it wasn't like that. Like the mashayikh would always encourage on like memorizing texts.
Every single word of the text.
Always. Yeah.
And there's a reason for that, right? Like the language utilized in text in Arabic, at least, every word had a very specific reason to the next
Yeah,
word.
absolutely.
Like now in English, when you study things, I don't know about you, when I pick up a textbook, you get the concept, you move on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But there, every word had a meaning and reason behind it. I think it's a
Yeah.
huge like motivation for them.
Yeah, and can I go on like a bit of a tangent from that?
Go
But
ahead.
like for example, the word ilm versus the word like let's say ilm versus ma'rifah. Why do we use ma'rifah for Allah, for knowledge of Allah, instead of ilm? Allah has ilm. We say Allah is al-alim, is the all-knowing. But why do we say like ma'rifah of Allah instead of saying like ilm of Allah? Ma'rifah, it means like there was a precedence of ignorance before you attain that knowledge.
Yeah.
But for Allah, He's alim. He never had a precedence of ignorance. He
Subhanallah.
always knew.
Subhanallah.
He will always know.
This is part of the falsafa of Imam Ghazali. He actually introduced this topic of this
Yeah.
unknown
Yeah.
attribute of Allah that people thought, oh, Allah is all knowing.
Mhm.
He has ilm.
Yes, Aaron.
But he didn't really, people didn't understand ma'rifah until
Mhm.
Imam Ghazali began to introduce it
Mhm.
using falsafa.
yeah.
One question that I had for you guys before we kind of jump ahead here. What made Imam, we talked a little bit about his sohbah, du'as, I'm sure, of Allah, of his father to Allah. What made Imam Ghazali, because he was a genius, no doubt about it. He was born genius, right?
Yeah.
There are many born geniuses in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what made Imam Ghazali Imam Ghazali? And my question here, and I'll kind of narrow this down, what role do you think Qadr had in making Ghazali Al-Ghazali?
I don't know, like we can talk about many aspects of his life, but maybe the part when he's in Nizamiya, he's built a reputation for kalam and debate, especially debate. And he was known as someone that once he brought so much logic and reason into his debate that no one could refute it. And that was a huge thing that brought reputation to his name. I don't think anyone maybe had heard of Imam Ghazali before that.
My what I'm trying to get at here is, if he had never met Imam Al-Juwayni, would he have become Ghazali?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Absolutely. No, I don't think so.
So he kind of touches upon this in his book Al-Munqidh. He says that in Islam, with Qadr, there's a lot of things that are circumstantial. And that is simply by the will of Allah. And we'll touch on this on the particularity of Allah and His attributes as well. We'll touch on it a little bit.
Yep.
But he was touching on this when he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His infinite knowledge, understand what infinite means. It has no beginning, it has no ending, it just is. In that knowledge, the circumstances are created by Allah for a specific case as well. And in that specific case, he happened to be born, younger son or younger brother of Imam Ahmad. Obviously Sufism, that takes a later precedence. He happened to travel and got into madrasa. He happened to go and be the student of Imam Al-Juwayni. He happened to then go ahead and be part of the kingdom of what was his name, Nur al-Mulk,
Nizam al-Mulk.
Nizam al-Mulk.
Yeah.
So he happened to go there. All of these things were circumstantial, but it's because of the qadr of Allah.
So that's actually part of his written work, right?
Correct.
Like he wrote a refutation to a lot of philosophy at the time.
Yeah.
And it's in his book, The Incoherence of Philosophers.
Yes.
And the topic, I think, what you're referring to was specifically the philosophers, the Neoplatonic philosophers. They would say, God does not know any particulars. Na'udhu billah. Meaning particulars, they define it as this. A particular is like the circumstantial events. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created circles, but they would say God does not know all the different ways that circle would be made, right? Or God made, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a human, a body, a jism, but God would not know all the circumstances of whether it is fat, whether it's tall, whether it's skinny, or whatever it is. So this was their idea, right? And Imam Ghazali, being Imam Ghazali, like he, part of his refutation of that and his deep understanding, obviously quoted the Quran, where the Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, not even an atom's weight is hidden from him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the heavens or the earth, nor anything smaller or larger than that, but is written in perfect record. Sadaqallah al-Azim. So, and I think that's when he mentioned the nature of knowledge for us, is that we are a product of our environment. Because of our environment, we gain knowledge. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who gives knowledge, right? He is the one, the creator of and the all-knowing. So that was his refutation, and obviously this picked up a lot of fuss during that time.
Yeah.
You know, when I was studying Imam Ghazali, I think, in my opinion, humble opinion, he was probably the predecessor of the question nature versus nurture.
Hmm.
He put that thought there. To what extent is someone him, and to what extent does the environment influences him or his nafs? And that's just a precedence about what kind of a thought that he had. Now, before we get into falsafa, we have to understand that his first book wasn't on falsafa.
No.
It was on a systematic approach on the Shafi'i fiqh and theology. That's what his first book was on. That's when Imam Al-Juwayni said, what? I've been buried alive.
It was that Al-Mustasfa.
No. It wasn't Al-Mustasfa. It was, I wrote down, Al-Malkhul. That was his first book.
Okay.
And after that, a few years later, he wrote another book, which is called Al-Basit, which was the legal rulings about the Islamic punishments. And now you begin to see, if you really read this book, you begin to see what is to come, because he started to impose the inner meaning of the legal punishments in Islam.
Ooh.
He began to understand, he began to show, wait a second. And it really kind of took, you know, it really became a butterfly in Ihya Ulumuddin, but right now it's a caterpillar, if you want to understand it from that. Like, you understand where Ihya Ulumuddin, what the thought process was, what years of theology, thinking, falsafa, and mantiq led for him to write his corpus magnum, obviously, which is Ihya Ulumuddin.
I think what you mentioned about the like his fiqh, like the fact that he started with fiqh before anything.
Yes.
I think this is it's kind of like something we should learn from as well. Just Muslims in general, like I think we neglect fiqh a lot.
Oh, yes.
And I think like first of all, he mastered fiqh, and then after mastering fiqh, he authored books on it, and he also authored like the hikmah.
He mastered fiqh in a way that no one had ever mastered, at least a Shafi'i fiqh, to that extent.
Systemic way.
Yeah.
Like it was,
Imam Al-Juwayni was Shaykh al-Islam of Shafi'i fiqh.
yeah.
No one, he was the authority.
If you're called Sheikh al-Haramain, you are.
That's it. You are the
if
authority.
you're
of the Shafi'i.
Imam Al-Haramain, right?
Yeah. And then he comes in and basically buries his ustad. So
yeah,
Figuratively.
so you mentioned like the book he wrote, which was the hikmah behind the punishments.
he touched on him.
Okay.
The hikmah behind the punishments, but he began to start to explore, why do we cut the hands off robbers?
Yeah. Okay.
Rather than we cut the hands off robbers.
Right.
That's it. Allah said so. We understand it.
Yeah.
Because understand, falsafa is in Islamic realm is in its infancy.
Yeah.
Because falsafa up to this point is almost completely based upon Ibn Sina. And who's the other?
Ibn Rushd?
No, Ibn Rushd comes
He's
After.
Al-Farazi.
Al-Farazi.
So these two.
Farabi.
Farabi, sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Farabi.
okay.
So these two scholars are the preeminent scholars on falsafa.
And it's
but
all
even
Neoplatonic.
Correct. And their falsafa is primarily dominant on, especially Ibn Sina's, on Aristotle.
Yeah, Greek philosophy.
Right.
Greek philosophy. And
Right.
the reason
Neoplatonic,
it's focused on Aristotle more than Socrates or Plato is because Aristotle came at the end and he refined the practices
Of
and
the
the thought
previous,
processes
yeah.
of the previous theologians. And when we discuss the book by Imam Al-Ghazali, you'll come to realize why he mainly fought against Aristotle, because he said, I'm going to hit the boss. There's no point in me because if I defeat Aristotle and Aristotelian psychology and philosophy, I will defeat Socrates and Plato as well.
And it's sort of like a huge lack of understanding, ignorance, I think, that he was against the notion of philosophy. That work was a promotion, or actually some would argue not. But the whole notion that he was just against philosophy through writing reputations to it.
I would argue he was probably one of the biggest understanders of philosophy at that time.
Well,
Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to write Al-Maqasid.
not at all.
And he wouldn't have been able to master these concepts to the point that his text Al-Maqasid al-Falasifa becomes Latinized.
Yes.
And then
No, it's praised.
spread throughout Europe
It's praised by philosophers.
to the point that they think that he's one of us.
He's one of us, exactly.
Like,
Do you know why it was so widely praised, though?
No,
What
I'm
was
curious.
the one attribute about it?
because how simple it was. Is that what it was?
No. There are many ways of simplifying philosophy because of how unbiased it was. It was just fact. A plus B equals C. C plus B equals A.
Right.
So he just really dove in. Point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5.
None of his own.
There's no opinion.
Which is quite ironic because I think some philosophers at that time, they had infinite regress. Like there was logical fallacy and a lot of things that they would say.
I mean, think about it. Philosophy and logic is bias. Inherently, it's bias. You know? But for him to make a textbook of philosophy in such a way where everyone understood philosophy, this is why it was the golden age of Islam. And I want to touch on this a little bit. I want to grab your thoughts, both of you guys, on this topic as well. Right now, for example, I don't think we have any scholar today who is an Islamic scholar and also an evolutionary biologist. We have some scholars who stand up and say evolution is haram, but they don't understand evolutionary biology. They don't understand Darwinism, natural selection, any of that. So, but they simply say evolution is haram. In today's day and age, Imam Al-Ghazali would have wrote a textbook on evolutionary biology, and then he would have wrote a refutation on that textbook that he wrote.
Yeah.
That's extreme. That's what we're missing in today's day and age.
We might have like an evolutionary biologist who is also an imam. Maybe he's a khatib.
Yes.
But he's not a scholar to the point that he knows
the Quran, a hadith, 1400 years of scholarship.
Exactly.
That would be able to concise evolutionary biology with Quran and a hadith, and then say, because of all of these reasons, evolutionary biology is wrong.
Yeah. So that's what Imam Al-Ghazali did. He used aql and he used naql, which is like the text.
Yes.
Which is like it's incredible.
So that's interesting. You said aql and naql. So we're talking about transmission here, right? And logic or knowledge, or however you may translate it. I think it is the foundation of the golden era. And this intellectual curiosity was the foundation of everything. They had Baytul Hikmah, they had Nizamiya at that time. They had Muslims were going towards a direction where everything, books were selling like how sneakers sell today.
How Instagram videos are watched today.
Exactly.
Books were being
books were on the streets like hotcakes. They were just being sold. Right? They were the thing that you wanted to get. Did you hear about that new book? Right? It's not about the new Dior Jordans or whatever it was. It was about, did you read that falsafa? Did you read that book? And that was the environment in Baghdad Sharif and wherever you went in the golden era, where Muslims would be challenging one another in a way that it was debate for intellectual curiosity and development. And Imam Ghazali was at a pinnacle in that point, like in the later years of the golden era, right? He was not only contributing so much to it, but he was at the pinnacle where he brought sort of like a paradigm shift, right? And I say paradigm shift not because he changed people's way of thinking, but their approach to thinking about things. And that approach to thinking is obviously in the books of philosophy. Obviously, we're going to talk about the book, The Aim of Philosophers, and then the incoherence of philosophers.
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned that their debates were for intellectual development, right? And like not just a debate or anything. Because today, a lot of debates we have are like
personal.
Exactly. Like it's like Sheikh Nawawi, he says like, let your minds clash, but don't let your hearts clash. And like we have this issue now, especially in the Ummah.
It gets personal.
But it's also
you know what this reminds me of? Imam Fakhruddin Al-Razi was walking one day, and with his scholars and with his students, and he was narrating. There was an old woman. This is called you know about this?
Yeah.
This is called basically it's have the faith of an elderly woman.
Yeah.
Okay.
The faith of old women.
Yeah, faith of old women. Yeah. So he's walking. This old woman says, "Who's that? You know, oh my God, big sheikh is coming." Oh, you don't know who that is? That's Imam Fakhruddin Al-Razi. He wrote 70 proofs on the existence of God. So this woman, she says, and excuse my language, but what kind of a scholar he is? He needs 70 reasons to believe in Allah. So it's a different thought process. You believe in Allah, that's it, right? Yeah. And when you start really going into deen, you realize, oh wait, I have to refute that, so that's why I need that reasoning. I need to refute that. I am jealous of the people. I'm not one of them. I'm jealous of the people who just believe in Allah because you're supposed to believe in Allah. I wish my mind was as simple as that. But because we have so much outside interventions and external factors that hone our mind, we need people like Imam Al-Ghazali, Imam Fakhruddin Al-Razi, Juwayni, Ibn Sina, Imam Al-Rushd, who comes after, who writes at Tahafatul Tahafata.
Yeah.
Right? And incoherence on the incoherence. But
Yeah.
all of these things, I mean, they all amalgamate to a picture about Islam. Wait a second, it's not simply La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Let's really dig into it.
Yeah, and that was the point of their work, right? The incoherence philosophy. The point was, do not blindly listen to this Neoplatonic view and the philosophized view of.
Do you want to just describe Neoplatonic for the
it was during the era of Aristotle is their view basically of philosophy, and it was how you would define this oneness that would exist, or how we would define Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it was defined in a way where the characteristics that we define Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with are lacking. So and many of those refutations were made by Imam Ghazali against this Neoplatonic view, and I think I gave more of a description on how it was refuted, but I think that's the general idea of how you can define Neoplatonic philosophy. Anything to add on that?
No, that's quite well described.
And so those refutations made were mainly against how they would describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like how we just gave the example of, right, of how they would say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was there with the beginning of time, right? Like that's one big refutation that Imam Ghazali made. They said the universe is pre-eternal.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Nowadays we know the Big Bang theory, which is a very probable theory that the universe is not eternal.
Yeah.
And obviously with our faith we know that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has and is always there.
Yeah.
Right. So
like the universe is contingent. It depends on something.
Yeah, it's contingent on something, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is necessary.
Exactly.
Right?
Wajib al-wujud. That's
exactly.
what
Wajib al-wujud. That's the perfect way of putting it. And the refutation by Imam Ghazali was against that notion. So these notions were built around these Neoplatonic views. Obviously, it came from these Greek philosophers. It was then adapted upon by Islamic scholars at that time. And am I correct to say, I guess it was the general populace way of thinking as well during that time was using these Neoplatonic.
Well, the caliphate, the Khalifa at that time, he was Mu'tazila, if I believe.
Yeah, so there were three basically realms of thought at that time, and he refuted all three of them. And the first one is Sufism. And the reason I say refute is because initially he was refuting the falsafa of Sufism before understanding the higher purpose of Sufism. We'll get to that.
So he did refute it.
He refuted it in the essence of reason. So
elaborate on that. Yeah.
So the Hafatul, the Hafat that he wrote.
Yeah.
What's the like? How would you summarize that in your? If you guys read some excerpts of it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, like,
if you were to summarize that the Hafat,
it's like, I would say 20. Is it 20 points?
Forget about the 20 points.
Okay.
Summarize it. All 20 points can be summarized simply.
In one sentence?
In one sentence or a couple of sentences.
A rebuttal of, I think Mu'tazila believes. So
that's a fact. Why, how? What reasoning or what philosophy, what logic, what mantiq did he use?
Do you want to have a go?
I know for a fact it was all a conversation about the logical fallacy in comparison to Islamic core beliefs, and how I'm getting longer than a sentence here.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
And how Islamic values and our core beliefs of the characteristics of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are, if you were to follow Neoplatonic views, you fall into a lot of
contradictions,
right? And it was a clarification of those contradictions.
Simply put, you're not wrong, but even simply put, it was the limitation of human reason on the metaphysical existence of God and his attributes.
That's a perfect summary.
Even more so if you want to go, he basically argued in all 20, basically, we find the same theme in all 20 of them, which was higher philosophy leads to a limitation of reasoning, which leads to hearsay. That's basically what he's saying. And all of the 20 points can be kind of summarized with this one statement.
And that's interesting because he was known to really ground himself in reasoning.
Yes.
And
That's what he prided himself on.
And that's like what philosophers sometimes just go against, because a lot of the stuff they just say, it doesn't have reason behind it.
Yep.
It's just out there in
Yep.
the
Yeah,
air,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And they're
Yep.
thinking about it. And I think on that note,
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
take a quick break and we'll be right back, continuing on falsafa. All right, welcome back. So we just defined the tahafut al-falasifa, which is, for those listening, it's Imam Ghazali's book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers. Now, it discusses refutations of Neoplatonic philosophy, and I think a good place to start is maybe let's go over some of these refutations, right? There are many refutations and topics discussed in it,
20, right?
20. But let's discuss the three big ones to go over it. I think we already went through one of it, talking about that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they declare, does not know about particulars, and only universals is how they just define it. But let's start with, they believe the universe is pre-eternal. That was a notion given, right? And so how we sort of discussed this, I think briefly, was we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is necessary,
Yeah.
and the universe is contingent.
Yeah.
Right? There is a concept of time and space.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start there.
Well, I think in order to understand the refutation, we have to understand the basis.
Yeah, yeah.
And the basis was simply that the universe has always existed.
Mm-hmm.
The universe is eternal, and time is also eternal.
Yeah.
That's basically what dumbing it down, but that's basically what it was. And go ahead.
And a point about like why they believe this, they also believed in God.
Of
So
course, yes.
how they kind of justified it was that they said that God had always had generosity and willed there to be a creation, and there couldn't have been a time when the will wasn't actually like actualized.
When the will wasn't actually right, so the will had always existed.
Yes.
And because the will always existed, so
Yeah.
did the universe.
Exactly.
And the universe could only exist because time must exist for anything else to exist.
Yeah.
For anything
Yeah.
else to exist.
Because we have to understand what philosophy basically says: without time, there's nothing.
And
time has
they were
to exist.
defining time as a law, basically. Like it was the law. It
Yes.
was the irreversible thing that things exist
It held their philosophy together.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And space.
Yes. So, how did he refute it?
He said, I mean, he brought up the notion that, I think his conclusion was, time is originated and created rather than eternal. And before it, there was no time at all. So what we mean by our statement is that God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is prior to the world and time. So that was his, I guess, conclusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he brought that from not the philosophy of Islam, but from the core belief of
Yeah.
Islam.
This is what
Right.
even Imam Abu Hanifa discusses this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the simple fact that for God to be omnipotent, he must have created everything.
Yeah.
Understanding the fact that if something existed eternally alongside God defeats the very purpose of an omnipotent God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it can only be God, and then he created.
Yeah.
Be, and it was.
Right.
This
Otherwise, he is
infinite
not.
regress. Like, this is what we're talking about. They had a philosophy that time is eternal,
Yeah.
but like if you ask the question, who created what, right? It falls. Like the whole argument just shambles, right?
Yeah.
You eventually get from proof 1 to proof 2 to proof 3 to proof 4. And you're like, who created time? Oh,
Yeah.
right. And the whole structure breaks
Yeah, and
apart.
that's why the basis of the Neoplatonic was basically that time was held as a constant. It was one of those things that you could not break down time any further. Time always had to exist for the rest of the philosophy to exist in its place. And basically what Imam Ghazali did was he came in and said, no. God existed.
Yeah.
And then he created time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? What was the second one? Just so we kind of go through some of these.
They said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not know of particulars, only universals. So let me define this. Universals being broader concepts, like I said, and particulars being the product of those, right? So
Give us an example.
like a body, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the body, and the particulars are whether that body is big, small, tall, short, whatever it may be, right?
Right.
And this was how it was defined and then refuted. It's
Mhm.
very interesting notion, and I think one really interesting thing I wanted to add here is that it is our core belief. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free of his in his decision.
Yeah.
Right? How they define it is that, you know, the decision can't be arbitrary. Right? If you have a free decision, and how some people explain it is like if you have two fruits that are the exact same
Mm-hmm.
and you choose to eat one, that is free decision. Right? You are choosing to eat one. Right? It was arbitrary. So if we make that decision, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, you know, the creator, right? He is free to make whatever decision. So therefore, it may seem arbitrary to us, but in our own cases, we can't argue that our decisions are arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
Because we are the product of our environment. Right?
Yeah.
We are, like you said, Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, went through so many stages in his life that led to who he is today. Same as us, right? You wouldn't be Dr. Abdullah if you didn't grow up here, go to a university here, study here, and then eventually get a PhD and then continue your studies, right? Same reason for me. If I went to work where I work or where you study, you know, you are a product of that.
Yeah.
It seems arbitrary, but it's not, right? Because you are a product of your circumstances in that case. So that was quite interesting because it was another infinite fallacy. It was just,
the best way to kind of falsify this was that somebody asked Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, does Allah sleep? And he's like, hold that thought. Let me go on Mount Tur and ask him directly. So he goes to Mount Tur, speaks to Allah subhanahu, Kalimullah. Oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the people of Bani Israel, he asked me a very interesting question. Do you sleep? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, grab 2 vases or bottles or glasses of water and hold them like this. And he did. But there's only so much that he could have held it. Well, however long he held it, eventually it came crashing down. So Musa alayhi salam, he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, oh Allah, what's the hikmah behind this? Why did you make me do this? He says, if I was to sleep even for a second, the 7 skies would come crashing down just like the water in your hands did.
SubhanAllah.
So basically, if Allah did not understand the particulars of everything within the 7 skies of Allah, and obviously above it, the Sidratul Muntaha, the Arsh and the Kursi and beyond, then everything would come crashing down. You can't just understand the universals without understanding the particulars, because if you don't understand the particulars, then everything will come crashing down regardless.
mm-hmm.
It's like, I think we're going to touch upon this anyways, but we'll kind of touch upon this now is, if I throw a rock, and this is what the Neoplatonics really said, if I threw a rock, I threw the rock, and the universality of it is the rock will hit something. Where it hits is the particular.
Yeah.
Okay.
Imam Ghazali came in and he said, no, if a human knows that if I throw a rock at one of our production crew, Abdullah Shahzad, with a purpose, even I know the particular that I'm going to hit him. So you're saying God wouldn't?
That's what I was about to ask. What's the contradiction? But now you just pointed it out.
There you go.
What's the contradiction?
So it's that
And the
simple.
perfect thing is the example is in us.
Yeah.
Like every example to refute it is in, if we can do it, why are you refuting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like that? It just, how do you comprehend that?
Yes.
Right? And like I narrated earlier from the Holy Quran, that in the 3rd ayah and the 3rd surah and the 34th ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that narrates that not even an atom's weight is hidden from him in the heavens and the earth. So where are you bringing this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not aware or not knowing of something?
I mean, even in the 30th juz, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَى وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَى. Allah will show you even an atom's worth of good.
Yeah.
And Allah will show you even an atom's worth of bad. So going back to your point, an atom is a particular.
Yeah.
It's not a universal.
It's not a universal.
You know?
I think it's very interesting that a lot of their, even though they were Muslims, like the Mu'tazila, they were Muslims, but their beliefs were directly refuted in the Quran and the Sunnah, like the Hadith. Like it's in the Naql.
Yeah.
Like you don't, like of course now the sectarian issues we have, it's like it's through a perspective that I have on the Naql and a perspective that you have on the Naql.
Transmission.
Yeah, the transmission, like the texts, like the Nas, sorry, essentially the Hadith and the Sunnah, the Quran.
Yeah.
So it's like now it's not like nothing is like clear cut like this anymore. Now the decision, the divisiveness comes from interpreting this ayah, for example, differently from him.
Right.
So I think that's very interesting that before it was kind of clear cut, like this is definitely un-Islamic.
Right.
Like,
Right.
but now it's like a bit harder to tell.
Well, I think like we've evolved in knowledge, right? Like we learn the Quran through the translation and the tafsir. Like even the Arabs, why was tafsir al-Quran written? Tafsir al-Quran was written in Arabic.
Yeah.
It wasn't a problem of language.
Mm-hmm.
It was the depth and the
Yeah,
breadth
yeah,
of Quran
yeah,
that
yeah.
needed to be understood, right? Until this day, we're translating it in ways to understand that context,
Yeah.
right? So in that time, I think it was more of a matter of Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah recognizing who his audience is,
Yeah.
who he's speaking to, and directly, it was like tarbiyat, it was guidance
Yeah,
for them,
yeah, yeah.
right? Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah never had a personal grudge of anything. It was for the betterment of the ummah, right?
Yeah,
Recognizing there was a core issue with their way of thinking, and then simply sort of like we say tuning. You just tune the people the right way.
Yeah.
The faith was there. The iman was there. The people, this is the golden era we're talking about. In under the banner of Islam, they're growing Islam.
Yeah.
So it just needed to be shifted. And I think we'll go through one more refutation. We'll talk about something that's quite funny when it's narrated by some scientists today. It's one more refutation is that bodily resurrection is impossible. So I find this one funny because resurrection is basically after death, right? You're talking about the events that transpire after death. So the refutation is very simple. Like there is no conclusive argument here. Science cannot comment on matters beyond death, right? There is lack of scientific value, right? You're not able to comment on the matters after death because who's researching the matters post-death, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is where belief comes in. That
Yep.
is the matter of belief then.
Yep.
And that's sort of where I think Imam Ghazali rahimahullah mentioned al-ghaib as well, right? The secrets that exist about our reality and future that we can't see,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I think that just to summarize these three, and as you mentioned, I mean, basically the thought process behind that was they didn't understand the nafs, they didn't understand the ruh. They said it was neither an accident, nor was it just existed. And so bodily resurrection can't exist. But that's basically what their point was, and obviously it was refuted, and you've mentioned a very good point. I think what Imam Ghazali really got at was use reasoning.
Use reasoning.
But don't over-rely on reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
Where reasoning ends, God begins.
100%. And I think that's where the crux of it.
Yeah.
And I think,
And sorry, I don't mean like God is everywhere. I don't mean like, oh, reason and then God doesn't exist in reason. I meant the concept where you don't understand Allah at that point. That's where reasoning just ends. Some things you just have to understand because Allah has made them to. And our job is obviously to go out and try and reason with those things. But there is a point where we cannot over rely on reasoning because we begin to doubt the very existence of Allah if we over rely on reasoning. And that's what Imam Ghazali was protecting us from.
was falling astray.
Yes.
And that is his protection to us, right?
Yes.
And that's actually very interesting that you bring up, you know, that refutation particularly, and how now let's talk about like scientists nowadays. There's you know what I'm gonna say.
I know where you're getting at. Yeah.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. All right,
Yeah.
this went viral. He was speaking about Imam Ghazali rahimahullah.
How long ago was this?
Ooh, that's
It's
a really
been a
good
while.
question.
I think
it's been quite a while, but
Okay.
15 years.
Oh wow.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't, but it's still talked about to this
I
day.
think there's a video that's even older than 15 years though. I think he's been talking about this for a
I
while.
have the video loaded up here.
And
Just
even
goes to show you that even the Western scientists, they study Imam Ghazali than even us Muslims.
Exactly.
I think
Because they understand.
he did not understand Maqasid Al-Ghazali. So he could not
How
do
do you
it.
read Maqasid al-Ghazali?
But this argument is not only Neil deGrasse Tyson. This Orientalist argument exists from over 100 years ago.
Yep.
It's an old argument.
Yeah, Orientalism is something that we can definitely touch on. But so I have the video loaded up. Actually, it's a snippet
play it.
from Neil deGrasse Tyson. He starts this, and I think we'll also add the clip onto the video itself,
Sure.
so
Mhm.
people can listen to it. But I'll timestamp it here. It's Neil deGrasse Tyson.
You know, there's a whole itinerary necessary for how to be a good Muslim. And
Which book is he referring to? Does it say?
I believe he's referring to Ihya.
Okay.
Because he's speaking about spiritual.
Ah, okay. Yes. Okay.
Contain the assertion that the manipulation of numbers is the work of the devil. Two, actions that you see in
The manipulation of numbers is the work of the devil. Let's go to the next one.
Surely he said that.
nature are the will of Allah. Well, if
Actions in nature are the will of Allah. So that's what Imam Al-Ghazali is quoting.
you drop a stone and it falls, Allah will. If that's your explanation, your curiosity stops. You combine everything happening in nature being the will of Allah to the manipulation of numbers being the work of the devil, and the entire enterprise of that golden era collapses.
Ooh. Now that's a point.
What do you want me to do?
Apparently,
Let's start with.
apparently, the collapse of the golden era is, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, guys, renowned astrophysicist, that it's because
Let's go to that part after. Let's start with like the first few things he said.
Well, I'm down to start with the first thing, but the
'Cause
collapse of the golden era apparently
It's
is,
huge. Yeah, we
it's a
like.
huge point. Let's start with all right. Arithmetics apparently is the work
Yeah.
of the devil.
So when I was doing my research, I found this website called historyforatheists.com.
I know what you're going for.
But this is so funny because like their article is called Neil deGrasse Tyson and Al-Ghazali, and they explain here. It says they're their own words. On the contrary, he was very clear. He, as in Imam Al-Ghazali, was very clear that mathematics and natural philosophy were valuable, beneficial, and to be encouraged and studied. Most importantly, Al-Ghazali did not say, as Tyson had claimed repeatedly and emphatically, that mathematics and the manipulation of numbers is the work of the devil. So he straight up didn't say it. Like he did not say that. And then he counted mathematics among the sciences that were mahmud, so praiseworthy.
It's very
Okay.
I mean, this is an atheist writing.
And what about the second point that he made?
Let's go back to it. He said that everything is by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yep.
So that reduces
It-
curiosity.
It eliminates
Diminishes.
curiosity.
Diminishes,
basically.
yeah.
How would you refute that?
I mean, I think. What were his exact
Just
words?
just because something is created by the creator, how does that diminish your value of curiosity to what that creation is?
I think what Neil deGrasse Tyson was getting at was if Abdullah Shahzad fell off his chair, it was by the will of Allah. That's what he's trying to say. Forget about Abdullah Shahzad's failure as a human being. Allah willed it, and so it happened. So we don't need to worry about why he fell.
You didn't actually have to fall.
Yeah, you don't actually have to fall. We just need to worry about that he fell. It was Allah's will.
So
Don't
that's
question it.
by saying. So
That's
now
what
we're
he's
saying
getting at.
That I'm not even curious about the mechanic of him falling.
That's what he's alleging, that Muslims, based on the concept of Imam Al-Ghazali, is because I threw a rock and it fell on the ground, you don't need to worry about gravity, you don't need to worry about why it fell, how it fell, where it fell. It just fell because it is by the will
Which is
of
hilarious
Allah.
because Muslims came up with the formula to calculate the trajectory of throwing whatever it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
to make
But
a
again,
ball.
and this ties in directly what Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying. Yes, they did, but then Imam Ghazali came out with Ihya al-Din and all of this, and all of a sudden, Islamic Golden Age is done.
Yeah,
So there's-
curiosity.
That's what he's basically getting at. My question to you guys is, how would you refute that?
I think okay. So there's
'Cause
a
he's technically speaking.
Did curiosity end? That's another question, right?
Well, before we get that, and I don't want you to refute the question with a question.
Okay.
It's that he's not wrong in saying that it is by the will of Allah that
Yeah.
Abdullah Shahzad fell.
yeah.
Explain.
So I think before I get into like explaining that, so there's a doctor. His name is Dr. Shai Malik, and he kind of speaks about like the Orientalist views on Imam Al-Ghazali. So the claim that he explains that the claim that Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying is that because of this rejection of natural sciences and philosophy, he had a spiritual shift, which means Imam Al-Ghazali had a spiritual shift. So he rejected cause and effect. So there's no rejection of cause and effect, and so to answer like your question, cause and effect does exist. So that's the sunnah of Allah, like, and otherwise, the world would be in chaos, right? So therefore, there's a sunnah. There's a how should I say, like a
Practice.
like a
An
practice,
action,
like
a
habit,
happening.
like a habit of Allah, I guess.
I wouldn't say habit. No.
Habit. Well,
What are you trying to get at?
I'm trying to say that there's a sunnah. Allah has a sunnah of how the world works.
Nizam is a better way. I think a system of how the world works, and
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
inclusive
yeah.
of cause and effect.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think is that what you're trying to get at?
Yes. And then this cause is by Allah, and then the effect that we see as an effect of the cause is also by Allah. So essentially Allah is the cause, and both, like,
Allah is the cause, okay?
yeah, I mean Allah is the one who makes the cause.
So
We know Allah is the cause of the cause and of the effect.
So Allah put in my, let's say, just so everyone understands.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting and sensitive topic.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm going to throw a rock at Abdullah Shahzad.
yeah.
So I'm going to take this bottle and I'm going to throw it at Abdullah Shahzad.
Yeah, do it for real.
Allah has put that cause in me. is what you're saying.
Yes.
So Allah has now made me do that. Is what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
And
So then, if that's what you're saying, that Allah made me do this, why is now Allah testing me on the thing that He's made me do?
okay, so now we're talking about taklif,
Yes.
like legal.
Yeah.
I guess. How would you say taklif? What's taklif?
The legal reasoning, you can say.
Why you're held accountable?
Yes.
Let's see, I have it somewhere in my notes.
Yeah, no worries. What do you think about this while he's finding his notes?
I
Because what he has stipulated, and I don't agree with it, and I'll explain why I didn't agree with it. He stipulated that Allah has now made me throw something at Abdullah Shahzad, which is a sin. I have hit him, caused him bodily harm, and now Allah will punish me, even though He's the one who's told me to do it.
Okay, so here's what I have in my notes.
ahead.
I wrote, everything happens by the will of Allah, and humans have limited free will, so we get to choose, like,
Why do we have limited free will?
because you can't just, because there's again, like, the nizam, like the structure in which we live. Like, we cannot do anything we want.
Yeah, I can.
We cannot.
Yes, I can. If I wanted to right now, I could strangle Abdullah Shahzad.
Yeah, but that's in your capability. You're capable of doing that. Like,
Correct.
can
And
you?
people do it.
Okay, but can you
Yeah.
Can you get me $20 billion right now? You can.
No,
you can want to do that,
I can't create anything. There's a difference.
right?
I'm not a khalik.
Yes.
I cannot create wealth. But whatever I have the capacity to do, I can do.
Exactly. So that's the limit.
Yes.
Your
that's the
capacity
limit.
is the limit.
My capacity is the limit.
Yeah. So so we have this limited free will, which Allah knows and has ultimate control over.
So Allah has control over our free will.
Exactly.
Okay, is what you're trying to say.
That's what I'm saying.
So then we don't have free will.
We do,
Okay.
but it's that ayah in I believe it's Surah At-Takwir, the very one of the very last ayat.
You want to pull it up? I can pull it up.
وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا.
I just want to make sure that the meaning is there so that
Yeah.
we're all on the same page.
Pull
It's
it
because we're really getting into something this is like high level Islamic theology and philosophy. And it's something that's really misunderstood.
Oh, what did I
وَمَا
say?
تَشَاءُونَ, but you cannot will to do so except by the will of Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Is that what you want to say?
Yep. Yep.
So what's the ayah before it? Surely this Quran is only a reminder to the whole world,
Mm-hmm.
to whoever of you wills to take the straight way.
Yeah.
But you cannot will to do so except by the will of Allah, the Lord of the worlds.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that you understand. Now, is there anything else you want to change before I...
No, but I just hope I didn't say anything that makes me kafir.
Ali, you want to add something on there?
Because you're
No,
scaring me the way you're reacting.
I think it was interesting you just brought up the cause and effect as the example here, right? Like, I feel like that is a bit a reductive of the whole system.
It is.
Right? Because it will exist very in every aspect of everything, right? For something to be, it is to first be willed, then to be, right?
Mhm.
And that will taking place is if the creator wills something, it is that way, right? So for example, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed, we are created. We are created, so we are something. We are the creation.
Mm-hmm.
The creation also has its fundamental mechanics, right? Just like a system and nizam is, the creation interacts with one another. The creation also has its own way of working. Just like our whole body has its own way of working, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed, the body was created, and that will also is within any part of the creation. That does not reduce my curiosity, and I'm just in a very shallow answer saying that does not reduce my curiosity for what is the body. right? Or what is the creation? Just because something was willed into creation does not reduce my curiosity for what is that creation, is what I would say.
Okay, so we touched on two different topics. I'm just going to quickly touch on both, just so that we're all clear. So first we'll touch on Zaid's topic about free will and the concept of will. What we need to understand is that there's an inner body within us, which is aql, which is qalb, and which is ruh. That's within us, correct? Then there's an outer body, and that's nafs. And then there's nafse lawama, nafse amara, nafse mutma'inna.
Yeah.
The nafs goes through stages. Allah gives reasons outside which allows our nafs to move. So Hazrat Ali alayhi salam, he asked a question to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to judge us, and if he dictates all good and bad, then why should I do anything good and why should I do anything bad?
So this is Sayyidina Ali asking.
This is a hadith.
Prophet
I believe it's one in the 6 books.
Okay.
Sahih Sitta. Rasulullah's answer was very simple, and I think this is something that everyone take home. It is on you to do good with what you believe to be good, and Allah will make the good easy. And if you make the evil upon you easy, then Allah will make the evil upon you easy. That's the concept of free will. We all have free will. That has to exist, because if that doesn't exist, then there's no test. Because on the Day of Judgment, one of the questions that people will say, "Oh Allah, you told me, you never gave me hidayat because you willed it." That's not enough. That's not enough. You will still be judged, because the concept of hidayat exists around you. It's your will that should drive you to that hidayat.
So it's not about your capacity.
You should pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open up your hearts, because who saw Rasulullah? Abu Bakr. Who saw Rasulullah?
Abu Lahab.
Abu Lahab.
Subhanallah.
Both had free will.
Yeah.
But Allah willed one of them based on the good that he did.
They saw the best of creation.
Because he's a mirror. But anyways, that's another topic, and we want to get into that because that's going to open up a new can of worms. What you were saying is 100% correct, and I do agree with. Understanding that everything inherently has within it the will of Allah does not diminish the curiosity of understanding why something does, why something is doing it.
And it's very interesting because this process of will is actually existent in us. When you want to do something, you will to do something, right?
Yep.
And that leads to, will leads to your niyyah. Your niyyah then leads to your amal, right? And in this case, but we're a lot more reductive. We're the creation of Allah, right? So our action in this case is something that is the product of our will and niyyah, which is part of our nafs, right? So is a product of our nafs. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills it, it is what it is. So if you think that curiosity stops there, then that is a very, very shallow understanding of the creation, in my opinion. I think that's just a brief response to what Neil deGrasse Tyson had to say.
Do you want to go over the last part though? What he said about the?
I actually do want to ask that question.
Yeah.
The decline of the golden era.
Yeah.
This is something that people in this day and age still talk about and argue about. And they say that Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah was the cause of, or a huge cause of, the decline of the golden era.
I think we should mention it's not just Neil deGrasse Tyson who said this. It started from what was the guy's name? It's like Ernst Renan.
In the 1950s, 60s?
Something like that, 1900 something.
Yeah.
Definitely much earlier than Tyson.
Yep.
And
so what's your answer to that?
To
this quote of Neil deGrasse Tyson that Imam Ghazali brought upon the downfall of the golden age of Islam?
I think there's a couple ways of looking at it. So if you're talking about political downfall,
look at it holistically.
The golden era is existent. The Muslim Ummah is quote unquote united for the most part. Obviously, there's differences.
No, I would say
beliefs. United in the sense of there is a huge hub that is driving the nation forward.
Okay,
right?
I guess you can say that.
Then, now, I would say where did the golden era exist? Right, it exists within the Seljuks. It exists within this broader empire, right, where a lot of scholars and curious individuals lived. My short answer is the golden era fell due to geopolitical reasons, right? The Mongol invasion happened, it fell. It was the victim of an onslaught in a war, right?
Now, keep in mind, and I'll answer as well, and I have an answer to this as well, but just for you, the Mongols eventually became Muslim as well.
Yeah,
all of them.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
So keep that in mind. Does that really mean that the golden era of Islam died down? If everyone accepted Islam, even if they caused the decrease of the golden age?
But it did. I think it did. Like because
the libraries of Iraq were burned down. And
exactly.
I got you.
You
I know what you're
lose
saying.
all that knowledge. You lose that central hub of knowledge. The structure, the infrastructure, everything was gone.
I think you have a point in that, like, we lost a lot of knowledge. We lost a lot of like our intellectual tradition.
Yeah.
But I don't think it declined from there. Because I think Imam Al-Ghazali is like the bedrock to many brilliant
I didn't
theologians.
say decline, though. I said the golden era declined. Intellectualism and our knowledge still exists, and we have those books of these big scholars that we still
Yeah,
use
we
to-
do.
Like we have compilations in the Tafsir al-Quran. We have Imam Nawawi's compilation of
Yeah.
hadiths. We have commentaries on the Quran. We have commentaries on hadiths. We have commentaries and studies of fiqh and jurisprudence that still exists, right?
Yeah.
It was more so a society that fell, right? And my point here is it was a geopolitical downfall. On your point of the Mongols, it's a very interesting point, but I think that's another chapter, right?
Sure.
Islam. That's my opinion.
Do you have any?
Yeah, I mean that's when the Mughal Empire would come from
Mongol
there
or
as well.
Mughal? The Mughal Empire.
Mughal,
yes.
yeah, they would come from
Yeah.
that as well.
From that
So
lineage.
yeah.
Do you have anything to say on that as well?
No, I think I misunderstood his question because I mean his point, because I think you meant the decline of the golden era of Islam.
Golden era. What do you have to say?
My answer is very simple. I think it's, as you mentioned, reductive to say that one man caused an entire era to fall.
But like, the time is just off. Like, the
I
time.
don't.
Off,
It's never one person. It's a whole movement.
Yeah.
It's a whole tribe. It's a whole union. It's a whole all of this thing.
It is a way of thinking.
It's a way of
okay, you
thinking.
can argue that maybe if that's what you believe, that the countering of Neoplatonic philosophy brought the downfall of philosophy, you maybe could make an argument
I
there.
think
But
You
it's-
can't make that argument either, because it was actually this Neoplatonic philosophy which made its way into Europe, and then European Christian civilization fell because they didn't have any Imam Al-Ghazali.
I don't want to go back onto there, but I'm just going to mention this. This is human psychology. We tend to create big events due to one event. North America was found by who?
Christopher Columbus.
No, it wasn't.
I mean, that's what they say. I'm just
Pakistan was founded by who?
Jinnah.
Qaid-e-Azam. Wait, where did Lama Iqbal go? Where did the Muslim political party go in India? How did World War II start? Somebody got shot in Austria.
No, that's World War One.
Yeah, World War II.
Yeah,
Anyways, World
yeah,
War I
definitely
started,
some guy
but
got shot.
You're
that's
saying
why.
that there wasn't already tension that was building up.
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very reductive
That's how humans think.
But
is
it's a bit
one
crazy
person-
for a scientist to say that, right? And a scientist,
a scientist. No, I would consider it's a bit. Less than, even more than a scientist. Sorry, I consider him a human. It's not a vastly statement. It's a wrong statement. Don't get me wrong, but psychologically speaking, it's what humans do.
yeah,
We make really huge, complex assumptions, and we narrow it down.
reductive reasons.
Yeah, and we just be like, oh, he's the cause.
I think this is also something about pushing an agenda, because they don't want, like, look at all the Muslims who look at Neil deGrasse Tyson and say he's an intellectual.
Yeah.
And then when you look at him and he's saying that Imam Al-Ghazali is the reason that Islamic golden age fell, then these Muslims will be like, oh, Imam Al-Ghazali. Like, I'm not talking about the Muslims who reject him for his kalam. I'm talking about the Muslims who will just look at him as a liberal Muslim, let's say.
Well, that's because of the books that Imam Ghazali rahimahullah wrote as well, right? Because he brought moderation
To the thing.
to the deen. And, moderation was something that maybe some would... The al-iqtisad is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right? You brought moderation in belief. And I think we'll briefly just say, like, it was a book that, went against critique, Mu'tazila, and also
I wouldn't say this one was a critique. It was more like kind of laying down the foundations of what is right.
It was more of what's the word I'm looking for? A commentary.
new commentary,
Yeah.
and that brought it brought a very cohesive understanding to a middle ground that can be used.
Yeah.
But what I do hope that we can briefly touch on is just the you said crisis at the beginning that Imam Ghazali rahimahullah had in his life, and that led to sort of his isolation, his changing to the tasawwuf spirituality, tasawwuf meaning spirituality in Islam, and how that led to him authoring books on it. So I think let's briefly just talk about that, the authoring of the books. And
It's been I think we've been at it for over an hour, and we've still only touched the surface of Imam Al-Ghazali.
Yeah.
That's just the personality that he is. This particular instance is one of those instances that I love in terms of scholarship. Basically, the story goes that he comes into the university to teach, as he always does, and this is at the height of his fame, of his accolades, of his reputation. Everyone knows he's
publicly debating people.
He's winning each debate.
Yeah.
You know, and people are, Ghazali, Ghazali, Ghazali. So he comes in to speak with the students, opens his mouth, nothing comes out. He cannot speak. And obviously people start to call doctors. And what do they medically, do you guys know what they say to him? What happens?
No.
They say that you've got either clinical hysteria or melancholia. So melancholia is described as a diagnosis of scholars, especially, and not just Islamic scholars, Western scholars as well, where in today's terminology, you burn out. You become exhausted of the scholarship burden that's on your shoulders, and you just can't do it anymore. And your body just tears it. This is when Imam Ghazali, and he considers this a gift from Allah, he realizes, and by the way, Qalia, it comes from Qalia, and Qalia is a attribute that every scholar has and you need to be able to sit down and work. And melancholia is when that Qalia becomes strained to such a degree where you just can't, you're done. So he realizes, hold on, who the heck am I? I have always thought that I am Ghazali. I wrote all these books. I am falsafa. I am logic. Wait a second, that's me. But am I not everything because of Allah? So he took the burden off of him, and he realized, wait a second, my fame has gone to my ego.
Yeah.
I think where I am is because of who I am, because of what I've achieved, but I'm not giving the credit to Allah. This is when he then does what? He vanishes his affairs. He gives his money to his family. He says, I'm going on a pilgrimage. Everyone assumes the pilgrimage is where? To Makkah. That's obvious. But his pilgrimage was as a janitor in Damascus. It was one of those mosques, and this is when he begins to really tie in with Sufism.
yeah,
Because that's when he begins the study of self, because he's realized he's at the epitome of fiqh and usul al-fiqh and mantiq and falsafa, and then he's like, but I'm not at the epitome of self, and that's what the self is, the science of the self. That's when he begins to understand it and realizes it. And this is also, and just before I end,
10 years of his life.
10 years of his life. And this is where he gets his Hujjatul Islam, because he describes the Tasawwuf in such a way. In order for you to become a Sufi, you need three things. Number one, you need a guide. You can argue that Imam Ghazali didn't have a guide, but we're not getting into that argument. Number two, you need a map. Number three, you actually need to go on that journey with that guide and the map. So Imam Ghazali, the reason he's called Hujjatul Islam is because he's noted to have said, I had the guide, I had the map, I went on that journey, and I got to my destination. And I saw what I needed to see at that destination, and so I saw the proof of the tasawwuf. That caused him to be called Hujjatul Islam.
That's a very, very perfect place to, I think, wrap this up. I know we have so much to talk about. I still have a couple of pages.
Yeah.
And even I know you have loads of pages that we can talk about.
We haven't even touched on Ihya Ulumuddin.
We haven't even touched on the Magnum
That's
Opus.
his big one, yeah.
And I think we will continue
That would be
to
a
touch on these topics.
whole episode itself.
Yeah.
We will speak about Imam Ghazali rahimahullah again and discuss the topics of the tasawwuf. I know we're going to be speaking around these specific topics, generally speaking. may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our speaking
Ameen.
about this
Ameen.
and
Ameen.
allow us to be guided upon a path that allows us to be intellectually curious,
Ameen.
rigorous in our reason and logic, that guides us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that guides us to our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
Sallallahu
that guides us to the truth and haqq. And through this, we may use and learn from Imam Ghazali, the proof of Islam, Hujjat al-Islam. Thank you so much for tuning
And guys,
in.
remember, if you have any questions, you feel free to put the questions in the comments, and you can shoot us a DM on our Instagram page as well.
Yep.
If you ever need any sort of questions that need answered, we'll answer them not live, but on the podcast, inshallah. Whenever we go live, then we can even do some live question answers as well.
We can do
I
that.
think this one could have like a part 2 as well.
Oh, this could have multiple parts, believe me,
parts.
because we haven't even got into my dissertation, Imam Ghazali.
Yeah, well, like we haven't. That's what bulk of my research was. And that's not.
Well, I guess
Didn't even
the viewers
mention
will
it.
have to tune in for that. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.